There was not one misstep. There was everything was as perfect as it could be with the team that had worked together for 5 years. And it just amazed me how smoothly that flowed and how quickly it all transpired. It was better than I've ever seen in any emergency room I've worked in, quite honestly. So that was really rewarding. And there wasn't one person on a team that didn't play a role in that girl surviving.
Welcome to the St. Martin's Cloak podcast, where we go behind the headlines to focus on humans, not statistics. In today's episode, we hear from Stuart Kremzner, an ICU nurse and volunteer with Team Rubicon, who recently deployed to Venezuela as part of an emergency humanitarian relief mission. Links to support the mission of Team Rubicon and our friends with the Venezuelan grassroots NGO Fundacoven are in the description. We hear from Stuart about what it's like to deploy on short notice for natural disaster response, the reality of the situation on the ground for the Venezuelan people, how Team Rubicon operates across the United States and internationally, who should volunteer with Team Rubicon, and much more. But first, a quick introduction. All right, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in. This is Andrew Loftusness recording from Istanbul.
And this is Milos Maggiore recording from London.
All right, so we are fresh off the back of our latest interview with Stuart Kremzner, an ICU nurse who volunteered with Team Rubicon and recently deployed to Venezuela as part of an emergency humanitarian response in the immediate aftermath of the devastating earthquake that Venezuela just suffered. I feel very good about this interview. Team Rubicon has an awesome mission. I've been aware of them for quite some time, so I was really grateful that we were able to get a volunteer on the show who recently deployed with them as part of a natural disaster response. Milos, I don't know about you, but while we were talking to Stuart, I felt honestly very motivated. I think it's a great mission to be a part of. How do you feel?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, big thanks to Stuart for agreeing to coming on, and big shout out to our mutual friend Robert who put us in touch. But yeah, absolutely. Team Rubicon, Stuart will do a great job of explaining the ins and outs of how the organization works, but essentially, founded by veterans who wanted to give, people a sense of purpose by working for that, larger than themselves mission, that common good. And you and I have both got experience, doing volunteering work abroad to, various extents. And that same drive that initially pushed me to doing that, I could feel it, yesterday talking to Stuart whenever he was talking about the team cohesion, the shared sense of purpose, and honestly just the, almost like that selfish feeling really of helping people, and just because it feels good to help people. And yeah, Stuart exemplified that really well with his deployment to Venezuela, which obviously a massive thing to undertake.
Yeah, 100%. Stuart, thank you so much for coming on. Massive respect for the work that you and your teammates have done in Venezuela. And really, I mean, he's been volunteering with Team Rubicon for years, right? So this is just one excerpt of the work these guys are doing constantly. We do want to give a shout out to Team Rubicon and encourage anyone listening to consider volunteering with them. If that's something, listen to the interview, listen to Stuart's experiences, and honestly, like the strong sense of purpose that he describes. And if that's appealing to you, check out their website. We will definitely link that out in the description. To my knowledge, Team Rubicon was originally founded by and for veterans, guys who recently, or maybe a little while ago, separated from the military and were experiencing a crisis of meaning. I think it's fair to say, asking for a friend. So if you listening are in that position and you miss that sense of purpose and camaraderie and teamwork and service, definitely check them out. Consider volunteering. They have a massive national network. They respond constantly to any sort of natural disaster and all across the United States. I don't know as much about their international network. Of course, that's what we talked about with Stuart, and he mentioned that the organization is working on expanding that. And actually, as he said, it was founded in response to the earthquake in Haiti back in 2010. I'll let Stuart explain all of that. But anyways, yeah, my main takeaway was that this is a great mission, a great team, and we want to encourage people to consider being a part of it.
Yeah, because obviously it has to be said that you don't have to have been in the military or any kind of organization of the like to then qualify to work with Team Rubicon. You can be anyone who just is motivated and wants to, to have that sense of helping out across the world. But I mean, it is rough going, right? And I think Stuart does a good job of explaining this. You go there with very minimal equipment, very minimal sustenance, and it is all self-sustaining. So, they are able to essentially work with what they bring with them. But I mean, let's just take this case of Venezuela, right? And you and I, we did an emergency episode right after the earthquake. And already there was, it was such a chaotic situation. As it stands right now, obviously the earthquake is over, but the aid response is still continuing. I believe the latest figures are something in the lines of, number of dead approaching or over 6,000 people. The amount of seriously injured and hospitalized, you're looking at over 70,000 people. And then there's like another 10,000 that are still that still remain unaccounted for. And so this is still a massive effort. And it's something to remember that, when natural disasters occur, it's not a one and done. It's, obviously it just takes a long time to get things back to a decent standing.
Another reason I was glad that we were able to talk to Stuart is because, the motto of our show is humans, not statistics, right? And the earthquake in Venezuela is an example of one of these natural disasters where like the numbers, right, are so staggering that it's very difficult to actually comprehend if you had not lived it or if you're not responding to it on the ground like Stuart did. And it's also very difficult to put a human face on it, right? And that's what Stuart did when in the interview. I was very grateful for that. I think it's important for people to hear. And it's also important to keep these kinds of things in the headlines, right? Or for people to keep talking about them. Especially, Stuart was talking about if a disaster of that proportion were suffered in any American city, we would be just completely caught off guard by it, right? It would be a devastating blow to society. It's impossible to comprehend unless you're actually living it. But no, I mean, I think I'm glad that we were able to talk to Stuart. I think he's been back in the States for a month now, give or take. But the point is that it's important to keep talking about these things after they fade from the headlines, right?
Right.
Because after they fade the headlines, nothing really changes on the ground. In fact, some things may actually get worse in the sense of these communities lose international attention. The international community loses a sense of urgency. Donor fatigue starts to set in, right? But the human suffering on the ground continues long after the initial natural disaster has finished, for lack of a better word. Like the need is still very much there. So definitely grateful for Stuart coming on the show and refreshing that for everybody's mind.
So with all that being said, if you're listening to this and you work at Team Rubicon, we'd love to talk to you more about the organization as a whole, how it came to be, the aid model. So feel free, please, to get in touch. And obviously as well, general PSA to any organization that is working in or around Venezuela. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well, listen to your experiences working with the earthquake and beyond. So, please get in contact with us. Links in the description to our email and Instagram page where you can just reach out, and we'll get back to you and try and schedule something.
Yeah, definitely. We would love to hear from you. The final thing I'll say before we jump into the interview is that we are working with our partners on the ground, Fundacoven, a grassroots local Venezuelan NGO. They were there within minutes of the earthquake responding. Our friend Landis is helping us coordinate those efforts. And again, these are the guys. This is their home. This is their home. This is their community. So they're going to keep working and keep helping people, whether there's cameras and news crews there or not. And we want to support them however possible. So check out the link in the description for ways to do that, and feel free to reach out to us directly with any questions. That being said, Stuart has much greater insight into all of this than we do. So ladies and gentlemen, we are proud to bring you Stuart Kremzner. Stuart, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. To kick things off, can you just introduce yourself to our listeners and tell us a little bit about your professional background and how you became involved with Team Rubicon?
Yeah, my name's Stuart Kremzner. I'm an ICU nurse, work for Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center. I became part of Team Rubicon back in 2014, when Team Rubicon was a pretty new organization. They were doing primarily domestic operations for disaster recovery. And over time, they've grown and developed an international disaster response side of the organization. The organization was founded on actually a medical aid event in Haiti in 2010, but then kind of focused more on domestic. And then they've built out the international side over a period of time.
So in terms of your involvement in Venezuela, obviously that was, a very recent event. What were the exact dates that you actually decided to go over to Venezuela in the first place?
So for Venezuela, we brought in a team in multiple ways. We had a reconnaissance team go in at, I think they inserted right around July, 15th, about. And then they got a lay of the land. They wanted to see impact points for where we could potentially work. It was the environment safe? What types of resources would we need in country? And and that would also tell us what we would need to bring in, because we're a self-sustaining organization. Once we had enough information, they decided to mount wave one, which started. We linked up we actually entered the country on July 6th, and then went until I think we left the 21st.
Gotcha. So on July 6th, when you arrived, can you describe us a bit what the situation was like, how you perceived it to be, and how soon after you arrived did you actually start your work, having received all this reconnaissance from the other team?
So I arrived the evening of July 6th, and we flew into Valencia because the airport in Caracas wasn't receiving. They were open to a certain degree to military and some government-based flights that Venezuela had permitted, but all basic commercial air traffic was going through Valencia. So we arrived late afternoon in Valencia and actually entered Caracas, I think probably close to 10 o'clock at night. Couldn't see much. It was pitch black. When we had briefings, one of the things they talked about was trying not to drive in certain areas of Venezuela after dark. And of course, that's what we were entering Caracas in pitch black. And definitely, I think everybody was pretty, a little nervous, quite honestly, given the fact of the recent events. And then in terms of briefings, we were, definitely security, safety was a concern. The day after we arrived, we were going to go into the field. We decided to take a step back and evaluate some sites. And then it was on the 7th, actually the 8th, that we opened up, or it was the first day we started seeing patients.
So in terms of the work, so you started working a couple day or a day later, but over the couple of weeks that you were there, was there a change at all in the kind of work you had to do? Did your work evolve at all, or was it much of the same for the weeks that you were there?
It did evolve. So the area that we were working in was Catino Lamar, La Guera area, which is right along the coast, which is essentially about 45 minutes north of Caracas. That was the area that was impacted. We set up, there was a baseball stadium that was repurposed for humanitarian aid. And we set up in that parking lot. In that parking lot, if you can imagine like entry and exit roads with a good sized parking lot, there were a couple thousand displaced persons. So makeshift tents. And then within that new community there, we set up an open air clinic and started seeing patients. The first evolution of that open air clinic lasted about 5 days. Then there, they brought in more internally displaced people, an additional 2,000 plus, formalized the camp more, because this was an evolving situation. They started bringing in more resources like connecting water lines, um, bringing in more porta potties, things like that, that allowed them to service more people in that area. They brought in more permanent shelter structures as well. And as that grew, then we were given more permanent, like semi-permanent location in a tent, very adjacent to their operations center. So we moved about 120 yards to a little bit better location, more shelter from the sun. So it just gave us the capability to see more patients. It was a little more secure site, although the whole time there, security didn't seem to be an issue whatsoever.
Interesting. And before we deep dive into the actual response from Team Rubicon and yourself and your teammates in Venezuela, I'm curious about what the overall environment was like. I'm assuming that a massive emergency humanitarian response and the aftermath of a natural disaster is very chaotic and fast moving. What sort of interactions did you guys have with other international teams or the local government or just different players on the ground who were involved with the humanitarian response?
Uh, so I'll start with like when we arrived at the airport, there were humanitarian groups coming in and out of that airport. The people were generally welcoming. Even, it's Venezuela is a highly militarized country. Uh, that was an eye opener for a lot of people on the team that had only been to kind of, more benign environments, but there was a lot more military police presence in Venezuela. Given that inherent structure, I think there was a little more less chaos than we expected, quite honestly, on the ground. When we got to the site, it was amazing how clean things were actually. We were remarking that for people that, when you lose everything, you try to maintain some level of stability. And I think people focused on keeping their immediate environment very clean. And it was amazing to see this many people packed into such a small area. And the sanitation was unbelievable. It was like people were cleaning the sidewalks, their immediate area, like 2, 3 times a day. Uh, the immediate transiting into Catino Lamar or La Guera, a lot of collapsed buildings. Those were, by the time we arrived, most of the rescue operations were concluded. Um, it was more recovery phase. So I think during the rescue phase, there was much more probably chaos because you're trying to find what are going to be your sources to, what are your, you're trying to consolidate your resources, but then also find out what are your best options for trying to rescue. And I think that leads to a lot of chaos.
And did you guys have a lot of interaction with the local Venezuelan grassroots response, like very local humanitarian aid efforts?
So I personally did not. Our team leads did. So our team was divided. Our team was an 11-person team, and it was structured where we had 4 nurses, 3 physicians, and then 3 administrative or team leads that helped with determining the areas that were the best impact points and planning our operations. And then in addition to that team, we had 1 wash specialist. That's a water sanitation and hygiene specialist that is an expert in water purification systems, uh, waste management for human waste, agricultural, you name it. But the biggest thing is water purification, and so we bring those resources with us, along with all the equipment as well. So it was really the team leads. Our 3 team leads were going out and meeting with the local leaders, and then also interfacing with the World Health Organization and the team leads for kind of managing the overall response. And the local government and regional government were involved in that. And so those permissions were coming from those folks.
So I want to talk to you about the scope of the crisis, because the media cycle is such that despite this happening not that long ago, it's already no longer the talked about thing, right? And yet the numbers are staggering. You've got, I don't need to quote them to you, but 6,000 deads, 70,000 hospitalized, a couple thousand more missing. And all these numbers start blurring into each other a little bit. And what we want to always try and do, for a start, what did you get a sense of that scale when you were there? Was there that understanding of how big this was?
Yeah, absolutely. Just driving in, seeing the number of buildings that were collapsed. There were large, 14, 15-story apartment buildings that were semi-collapsed. So not completely, they weren't livable, but condemned at that point, where you could see where the whole midline of the building had shifted. Yeah, you could definitely get a sense. The other thing you could see, the first thing that struck me was driving into the area, just there, the smells of, bodies, of course. But then just thousands of vultures. You would see like clouds of vultures circling certain different areas of, where they're still recovering bodies and such, adjacent to where we were working. And just that, you could definitely get a sense of the scale. We didn't, since we had a designated area we were supposed to be in, we didn't do a lot of driving around to see adjacent areas. And that, first of all, our resources were designated in one area and we need to devote our time and effort into that. Our team leads and the reconnaissance team had gone into adjacent areas and they said it was just, apocalyptic, I think was the best description. And it continues to be so. The resources within Venezuela are limited. They're doing the best they can with the resources, but they're in a period of transition here, and definitely, that's why they bring in outside groups to help with the disaster response, and because usually even a very well-developed country can't usually manage the scale of a disaster like that. And they're definitely struggling, like I think any country. I think if we had earthquake in any major city in the US where 30 to plus thousand people vanished overnight, I think we would struggle in a highly developed country to manage something like that, for sure. Definitely for us, what I saw was the impact on the health services. their medical system was falling behind prior to the earthquake. This put additional strain on it. So many of the hospitals weren't functioning, definitely due to damage to the structural damage to the hospitals. Um, so it was managing all the different. We were taking the place of a hospital, essentially taking the place of a hospital emergency room with our like open air clinic. There are other organizations that came in as well that set up field hospitals that were doing incredible work, where they were some of the hospitals, some of the field hospitals at Samaritan's Purse set up a facility, International Medical Corps. Those are, from what I saw, from transferring patients, it was like transferring a patient to a urban level 1 trauma center in terms of, I don't think they had quite had those resources, but definitely to stabilize a patient, they had all the talent and resources to fill that void. Definitely the need exceeded the void for sure, is what we were seeing too.
Mhm. Are there any stories that you'd be willing to share of either people you served with or, people that you helped while you were there that you'd be comfortable sharing?
But yeah, absolutely. So we had the team we had of 3 doctors, 4 nurses. Um, it was just amazing the depth. Um, 2 of the physicians worked out of level 1 trauma center in Boston, Mass General Hospital. They were super high speed, and as well as the third physician, he worked out of a level 1 trauma center in Denver, Colorado. So unbelievable depth with the physician team. Where they're used to dealing with pure chaos, I think is what you would see in a inner city hospital. We also had among the nurses, we had a fellow that was a pararescue veteran. So that had been in multiple combat zones throughout his career. He was unbelievable skills. Uh, and then another ED nurse that was phenomenal as well. The whole team was great. So in terms of uh, specific story, we had a 13-year-old girl that came in, uh, completely non-responsive. So, uh, so usually, so my role on the team, this is when we had already set up in a kind of larger facility. Um, People would usually come in, walking on their own, but occasionally, people would like help people in. This girl had, I think, 2 people carrying, trying to get her into like our waiting area, and then she collapsed. Um, when we saw her coming in, the docs stopped what they were doing. One of the docs came out and you know, we started assessing the patient right away. We had the capability for this. We had ultrasound capability. So basically an iPad with an attachment where you can do an ultrasound. Um, so an ultrasound probe, so to speak. So we were able to determine that she was bleeding out of her abdomen. She had a ectopic pregnancy. So we quickly, you know, got IVs into her quickly, started running fluids. Um, but she was fading fast. She was completely non-responsive. Um, One of the problems we had was trying to, when we had this level of acuity, was trying to find who would take the patient. And we were really fortunate to have one of our team leads was fluent in Spanish, and uh, we called a couple of different groups to see who would take the patient. And luckily, Samaritan's Purse was willing to accept, because you can't just load a patient up on an ambulance and hope that somebody takes them. That could lead to lost time. So we found Samaritan's Purse was willing to accept the patient, but then it was transport. We didn't have transport, and there was one of the heads. there was a local town leader or a regional leader that was instrumental in the whole disaster response. He had actually lost some family members. Um, and he was kind of like the guy that knew how everything worked in the community. We called him, and he was able to get an ambulance to us within minutes, actually, to transport the patient. It usually could take close to an hour, just as a point of reference. And this patient didn't have that time, and we didn't have the resources to sustain her past probably about 10, 15 minutes. Um, so we were able to stabilize her, get her onto an ambulance, and they got her to Samaritan's Purse, where they did emergency surgery on her within like 5 minutes of arriving. And she ended up walking out of there a couple days later. So that was, but the thing that struck me was we had the whole team present for that, and everybody was everybody worked together like seamlessly. So we've had 11 people that had never dealt with a major crisis before. Um, and there was not one misstep. There was like everything was as perfect as it could be with a team that had worked together for 5 years. And it just amazed me how smoothly that flowed and how quickly it all transpired. It was better than I've ever seen in any emergency room I've worked in, quite honestly. So that was really rewarding. And there wasn't one person on a team that didn't play a role in that girl surviving. Uh, so that was really cool. Um, Especially when it's young, somebody younger.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that with us. On a similar note, I think the scale of the catastrophe was so enormous and it happened so quickly, right? Of course, thousands of people were killed and tens of thousands more were injured. And I think it can be difficult for people who have not been a part of that sort of response as you have been to truly grasp what actually happens to people who are living through that kind of disaster. So, as medical professionals, what sorts of injuries were you guys encountering most frequently from the people that you were helping?
But that's a great question, Andrew. So I would say the vast majority were actually, I would put it in three categories. There were acute traumas that people were having just due to daily life. There were construction workers working on uh, taking down buildings, demolishing buildings. So we would have trauma with that. There are motor vehicle accidents. I would say 80% of the people are on motorcycles in Venezuela. So a lot of injuries related to transport with that medium of transport. Um, we had another group of injuries that were related to lack of resources, such as fresh water and good hygiene. So those things such as dehydration, people coming in that hadn't been drinking enough water. Um, Mind you, it was 38, 39 degrees and almost 100% humidity in La Guerra there. So it's pretty hot. And these folks are living in tents. They didn't have continuous access to water. Although I was amazed at how effective the government was getting water to people. They had these big, huge trucks that were pulling up and filling up, helping people, allowing people to fill up water bottles and cisterns and things like that. And then also, anytime you have human waste mixed with, a shortage of water, you're opening the door to things like cholera, dysentery, things like that. So we started to see some of that, especially towards the tail end, a lot more cases of GI based bugs, which also leads to dehydration. So that's the second class. Third class that we saw a lot of was chronic diseases that weren't being treated. So when you think about uh, losing your house, you also lost all your medications. So we had people that needed medications for hypertension, for diabetes control, for pain management. So we saw a lot of patients that had untreated hypertension, untreated diabetes. So we were managing those, which would, in a US hospital, that would be a multi-day admission usually. We were treating these folks and then getting them stabilized, trying to give them some medications to tide them over. Um, and then uh, it wasn't on, it wasn't common to see them 2 days later with the same exact complaint. Then also all of like the preventative, not preventative, but regular care you would see for pediatrics, uh, and then OBGYN. So people late in their pregnancy not getting care, people that just had children that have no place to go to have the children checked up. And then one last thing we would saw quite a bit of was like COPD or asthma exacerbations. Again, people lost their medications and it was respiratory based.
Yeah, and obviously I imagine the dust that gets, sent up in the air doesn't help with people's ability to breathe, and asthma or not. But,
Yeah, exactly. Uh, and we were pretty fortunate. There was not the area we were in. They weren't doing a lot of demolitions during daytime. My understanding is they were trying to do some of that when people were um, at night. They were trying to do that just to keep down the exposure of dust.
do you think there are any general misconceptions that people may have about the response to a natural disaster, either in terms of the actual aid efforts, the needs of the community that's affected, or the impact on the people that you'd like to dispel?
I think the thing that struck me is how thankful people were for help, no matter how little it was. Um, and I think what struck me is, I think a lot of times when there's an event that you can't control, you like to try to, it gives you a reason to be angry at something. And I didn't see any anger with anybody there. No one was mad, complaining about anything. They were just happy for the help that they were getting, which was, I'm not sure if it was a cultural difference or what, but and I see in the US a lot of times we're always looking for something to be mad at and angry at and complaining about, well, we don't have this, we don't have this. These people were so humble and generous in terms of being like feeling like, okay, my needs are met. Uh, and again, how long you feel that way when you've lost everything and you're in a tent, I'm not sure whether that behavior will change in time. Um, but even close to a month after the event, we weren't seeing that. I was amazed actually.
So I'm very curious to learn more about Team Rubicon as an organization. To begin, what sort of emergencies do you guys respond to, both domestically in the US and overseas? And what does that actual aid model look like?
So for domestic, we'll respond to most any disaster site. So in the US, it's mostly, uh, I would say, tornado, flood based, weather based disaster responses. We really specialize in the recovery process. So we don't field search and rescue teams or that immediate response within the first 24 hours. We work on the recovery phase. So, meaning after usually 24 to 48 hours after the event, we're working in those communities to help the community kind of go through that process. A lot of times it's opening up roads with chainsaw crews or heavy equipment. So the Team Rubicon has teams that are Sawyer teams, which uh, are chainsaw teams essentially. We have heavy equipment capabilities. So we come in to a community, we rent heavy equipment from one of the local vendors. and we're able to open up roads, remove debris from roads, uh, demolish houses. A lot of times, in terms of the insurance process, the insurance company won't come in and they'll assess the damage, but they won't cut a check to the homeowner until what they the foundation is clear. So you have to have everything scraped off and down to cement. So especially in communities, in the Midwest, uh, in order for them to move on to that next stage, they have to have the house fully demolished. So we work on helping with that. With flood response, it's getting all of the debris out of the house that was damaged. So they do a great job with that as well for domestic. Other things they've worked on is during COVID, they mounted medical teams that were going to communities doing COVID testing and helping with the COVID response. Um, we're a pretty new organization to the international game. Internationally, we're at different levels of team capabilities, and we're a Type 1 mobile emergency medical team. So that allows us. We come in self-sustaining, and basically our scope of practice is to function as a pop-up emergency room. And in terms of disasters that uh, Team Rubicon has responded to, it's been the biggest ones recently have been Haiti, Jamaica last year. They were in 2010. That was the origin of Team Rubicon, where the founder, Jake Wood, went in with 6, 7 other colleagues and went into Haiti during the 2010 earthquake, and they mounted a medical aid response. And that was the origin. And there was always, when they got back and actually formalized the organization, I think the intent was always to have that robust international arm. Again, organizationally, you can imagine any organization that goes from 8 people to thousands goes through growing pains. And I have to say they've really navigated that well. Because there's always going to be, you expand, but is there enough funding to sustain all your operations? And like every business you know, not for profit, that's a, that's a that's a tough balance. Team Rubicon's done a really good job with that.
When it comes to these international responses, and maybe we can use Venezuela as a specific example, I'm curious about the recon teams that you mentioned at the start of this conversation. Can you give us some insight into how that works from the inside? For example, does Team Rubicon have a number of guys that are essentially on call in case there is some sort of a disaster overnight? Or I'm assuming the organization must have a deep roster of, people with different backgrounds who speak different languages. Do they put out like a call on your guys' comm system to, hey, who speaks Spanish? We need a team to deploy here, or what does that look like?
Yeah, that's exactly actually. Um, they have some depth with in-house. They have full-time staff that are specialized in operational planning, but a lot of what they're doing is volunteer based. So they put out the call as soon as the event happened. Probably within 24 hours, they were identifying people that could function in that reconnaissance role. It was 3 people. They had one native Spanish speaker, actually, who was Venezuelan, who grew up in Venezuela and was currently living in the United States. And she had been a member of Team Rubicon for close to 10 years. Then 2 other members, one that were both medical based. One was a flight medic, other was an ICU ED nurse. Both of those folks had some basic Spanish skills, but also had been on multiple other responses, so had a strong understanding of what they needed to learn when they came in as that team. Like everything, there's a little bit of a leap of faith in terms of having all the pieces come together. For us, the biggest bottleneck was visas, and it was just through one of the team members having a friend of a friend in Venezuela that was able to expedite that process, that first team got in very quickly, which they were able to do. Our visas as well, it got pushed through pretty quickly, quite honestly, for the first wave. Our second wave, we had a second wave actually that was ready to come in and take our spot that was already in Panama City. But unfortunately, their visas were not approved. So that second wave to continue our work was we didn't send them in.
And so once the recon team comes back with the intel, what does the rest of the process look like? Is there a debating moment in which, okay, are we able to go in and help? And if so, what does that call look like to, you and other potential volunteers? How does that sequence of events look like?
So as they're going through this whole process, they have a team of planners, volunteer and full-time staff that are looking at the safety and security, um, interfacing with other organizations as well, not operating in a vacuum. In the whole humanitarian aid process, there's a deliberate process that's protocol driven that allows organizations to come into a country in an emergency setting. And there are all these steps with the international humanitarian aid community that have to happen for us to come in. While those steps are being navigated by the international community, the World Health Organization, we're doing all our planning, seeing how many people we can bring in, seeing the scope of the disaster, seeing what the resources are in the country to sustain that, and definitely the safety, security. Um, is it safe to go in? What are our resources? If somebody gets sick, how quickly can we get people out? Where can we get them to? Those are always things that they have to plan and then balance risk versus reward, so to speak. A lot of those decisions, uh, I'm still learning about. I haven't taken an active role in the planning process too much. I've seen, glimpses here and there. Definitely know a few of the people on the planning team that are long-term professionals in that field. They work for um, State Department or another NGO at a high level doing this, and then have bridged over to Team Rubicon and share their knowledge. And usually on that planning team, there's somebody that has that area expertise from living in that country or um, being in an adjacent country and knowing how things work. And that helps us with the planning process.
And you yourself, how much time did you have between, getting the call saying, right, pack your bags, you're going to Venezuela?
It was, let's see, close to the first call out was from the time we left was about a week. Once we had the visas, it's like 30 hours, where they said, okay, we have your visa. We want you to be on a plane on Saturday. But prior to that, the expectation is once you throw your hat in the ring, you you should be ready to leave your house within 24 hours. So you should have all your bags packed. Um, the big expectation is that you're dealing with grown-ups here, so you need to know what to pack, you know, and bring and have enough basic experience to have everything ready to go. So yeah, Team Rubicon supplies things, but yeah, you better know how to pack your bag and be pretty efficient at it for sure.
Yeah, good skill to have as a volunteer, how to pack a bag. And just on a personal note, what what does it mean for you personally to be a part of the Team Rubicon and to do this kind of work? You've been involved with them for more than 10 years, you said.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big thing is you're part of something bigger than yourself, something you can't achieve as one person. And with their resources, you're allowed to help these people in a highly efficient manner and help a lot of people that ordinarily wouldn't receive that help. And that's incredibly rewarding, just that service of helping other people. And yeah, and be working with like-minded people. I think that's the big thing that draws people to Team Rubicon. It's people, you know, people that are focused on that mission, and they're putting the mission before themselves. And I would say that's the most common personality in working with people with Team Rubicon. Is it isn't about me, it's about let's work together to get this project done, and let's do a really good job of doing it. And Team Rubicon is exceptional at doing that. And especially as a Type 1 mobile EMT, Team Rubicon has always kind of operate on the principles of coming in with the smallest footprint possible. So in a disaster-stricken area, there those areas have no bandwidth to help additional people. So you can't come in as a large organization saying, well, we need to have hotels, we need to have water and safety and security. What Team Rubicon is really good at is going into unstable environments and coming in as a 100% self-sustaining operation where we'll sleep underneath the stars, not take up hotel space. We'll we bring in our own water purification equipment. We always will bring in more than enough equipment to sustain those communities after we leave. So with our operation in Jamaica, Haiti, in Morocco, we bring in lots of additional equipment for the planning purposes of sustaining these communities after we leave. So we teach them how to use the water purification equipment. We teach them how to dig latrines, kind of set all this up for better sanitation and hygiene. And then when we leave, they can continue with those resources. Teach them how to use the resources so they can, continue to have a little better standard of living after we leave. When we left Venezuela, we left $100,000 of gear that we brought to another NGO. And that was water purification equipment, medications, medical supplies. And it feels to have helped those communities and knowing that, okay, after we leave, there's going to be, they'll have some resources to utilize for sure.
Stuart, we really appreciate you coming on the show. I have a tremendous amount of respect for the work that you and your teammates are doing with Team Rubicon. And I honestly think that this conversation and your stories are going to inspire people to be a part of that and to find a way that they can serve. On that note, it's a priority for us to make sure that anyone listening to our interviews is informed on how they can actually take action to help people in the real world. So what would you say to someone who is considering volunteering with Team Rubicon? Who in your mind makes the ideal volunteer, and how can they actually take that next step and sign up and eventually get to the point where they can deploy as part of a response, either domestically in their state, in their own community, or overseas?
In terms of like ideal volunteer, I would say anybody that wants to help and has the time to help. Team Rubicon is amazing in terms of the training. That's the beauty of Team Rubicon's model is they'll take people that don't have skills and help them develop skills. So when you join Team Rubicon, they have the training to help with that. But I think the will, and I think having that will be selfless, not about you or trying to get happy snaps or disaster tourism. Those people, tend to have a satisfying experience, so to speak. But Team Rubicon will do the training. I think if you have the desire and wish to help, they'll find a place for you. I've seen, and as an example, one of the first national disasters I went to, there was a guy that bunked next to me, and he was moving all these logs all day long and walking around. And he sits down at the end of the day and he drops his pants and he had bilateral amputations. I didn't even know it. And like this dude, he was a veteran from war in Iraq, lost both legs. And he was out there working 12 hours in the summer heat and like didn't miss a step. It blew my mind. So yeah, no matter what your background is, they'll help you. And that was with Team Rubicon. It was a veteran-based organization, and Jake Wood, his goal was to help these folks coming back and separating from the military to develop that sense of purpose And that was the goal of Team Rubicon's origin, was to help develop this sense of purpose for these veterans coming back. And not just veterans, but firefighters, all sorts of folks that have kind of worked in these environments that are chaotic. It's been amazing at doing that for folks that, you're a little adrift sometimes when you come back from some of these, experiences. And having kind of a unified sense of purpose is what Team Rubicon was just amazing at giving so many of these people. And like, even for me, it's, when I started with Team Rubicon, I was working in a different career. It was through a training with Team Rubicon where we were getting wilderness first aid certified that I was like, this is what resonated with me, and that made me want to learn more about medicine. And then I ended up completely retooling, going back to school, becoming a nurse from that experience. So it can be transformational, some of the experiences you'll have.
Stuart, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Stuart. All the best.
This has been an episode of the St. Martin's Cloak Podcast. Today is August 13, 2026. Thank you for listening, and stay safe.